Bill Thompson wants to know, why is the left 180 degrees out of phase with reality? Everything they say is a lie. Everything they accuse conservatives of is what they are guilty of. Everything good and noble that they claim for themselves are held not by them, but by conservatives. If they believe so strongly in their worldview, why can't they state their position plainly? Beautiful question. Beautiful question. Well, Bill, I think what the definition of the left is today, we're not talking about liberals now, we're not talking about classical liberalism, this idea of freedom, private property. These are all classically liberal idea. We're talking about progressives. And ultimately, I think the reason that the left is 180 degrees out of phase with reality is because it has to be. It's not a coincidence, and it's not just on some issues. Progressivism is a mind control drug for people that can't handle reality. I really think it's that simple. Progressivism is a mental drug that allows people to avoid the consequences of reality. So if people have an acute sense of injustice, they will want to eliminate injustice, and I'm all in favor of eliminating injustice. I really and truly am. But I see justice as an individual issue. What harm was done to that individual and by whom? How do we redress that harm that was done to that individual by whom? How do we make them whole? And so what they end up with is they end up with a worldview that is predicated on the belief that reality, two things. First of all, that there is no reality. The elimination of reality from the worldview of progressives is the essence of progressivism. And it's not new. When the French Revolution happened, they said, we're going to create a new man. And a new man's going to have a new calendar. He's not going to have any more priests. We don't need religion anymore. We don't need aristocracy anymore. We're going to have a decimal calendar and a decimal day and a decimal this and a decimal that. They're going to invent a new person. And this belief that the fundamental structure of reality can be changed by wishing for it, by wanting it enough, is the virus of progressivism. The virus of progressivism is the wish. It's all wishful thinking. It's the wish that people can become virtuous through wanting it enough. And that's just not how people are built. And so every single time we try this, we come face to face with this horrible, horrible, horrible reality. The horrible reality that progressives have to face is, progressives say, if we all just got along, if we all just talked about things and agreed on things, there wouldn't be any war. What they're really saying there is, this is important too. When liberals and progressives say, if we could all just talk about things and work things out, then there wouldn't be any war because there'd be nothing to argue about. The unspoken assumption, this is a relatively recent revelation for me, but if you think about it, it's really true. You want a grenade to throw at leftists, here it comes. When they say, if we could talk about things, then there wouldn't be any more conflict, what they're really saying is, if we could talk about things, we could convince other people of the wisdom of our viewpoint, and then there wouldn't be any conflict. That's what they're saying. Because when they talk about finding common cause with Islam, and that this whole thing is just a result of these conservatives and their little shriveled fear-driven brains, if we could just talk with Al-Qaeda, we'd find out that there's nothing really to disagree about, that we'd get along just fine, that we wouldn't need an army and there wouldn't have to be war and nobody'd have to die and we wouldn't have to bomb kids. What they're really saying is, if we could talk with Al-Qaeda, we could convince them of the wisdom of atheism, the wisdom of sitting around in a hot tub sipping Chardonnay, convince them of the wisdom of letting women be treated like human beings, convince them of the wisdom of allowing homosexuals to live. All these other values that we have, it's built into this worldview that they have, that if we could just convince our enemies and talk with them, we wouldn't disagree about things, there'd be no war. The outcome of that philosophy is never, oh, well, we could eliminate war by not having any disagreements, and the way that we don't have any disagreements is that they get everything they want. In other words, the way not to have any war is to do everything that they want, which means that if you're one of these women arguing against war and saying, if we could just talk about things, everything would be swell, well, there's 1.5 billion people out there who whose attitude and response to you is, how dare you sit in the same room as men and have a conversation about important issues? Get back to the kitchen or the bedroom, put that veil over your face, and shut up and don't say another word until you're spoken to. What on earth could a woman possibly have to add to this conversation? That's one way to not have any conflicts, is to start to no longer disagree about this issue. Another way to get over conflicts is to have a conversation with people who think that homosexuals are a sin in the eyes of God and must be executed immediately. So one way we can avoid war is to hang homosexuals the way they want us to, the way they do in Iran and the way they do in some of these other places in Afghanistan. And if you happen to be a woman and you're raped by your uncle, or maybe your uncle and your dad and your older brother at the same time, then you need to be killed, young lady, because you've dishonored the family. Not them, you. We can all agree on these things and we don't have any more war anymore. We'll just do things their way. When you talk to liberals about this idea of, oh, it's all a big misunderstanding, what they're really doing is they're projecting in a way that is so narcissistic, so self-centered, so arrogant, so arrogant. They're basically saying that there's no reason to disagree with Al-Qaeda or the Nazis or the communists or whatever. It's all one big misunderstanding. What they're really saying is they're not real people. They're not real people. They don't have their real desires. They don't have their own religion. They don't have their own culture. They don't have their own value system. They don't have anything. They're just liberals that haven't found the light yet. So what you end up with is you end up with progressives who want to disarm us because they see armament and strength as the source of conflict. And if we just disarmed our side, that would be such a gesture of goodwill. We heard this exact same line of reasoning with the communists in the Cold War. If we would just disarm our side, that would eliminate the fear that's driving them, you see. That's all driven by fear. If we would just disarm our side and do this magnificent, magnanimous gesture and maybe pay some, we got all kinds of reparations to pay because we've been so awful. We freedom-loving people, just been so terrible, making the world rich and safe and healthy and feeding them and everything. We got to make up for that, got to atone for that. So we'll pay them and we'll give them all this other stuff. But then they'll leave us alone because there won't be any misunderstandings. I don't have that kind of arrogance. I don't have the kind of arrogance to say that 1.5 billion people who not only want Sharia but demand Sharia, they're not pretend people to me. They're not progressives who haven't seen the light yet. These are people who are real people, who have a culture that goes back a lot farther than ours. They have a culture and a history that is more important to them than progressivism is to progressives. And if you don't believe that's true, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't believe that Islam is more important to the jihadis than progressivism is to progressives, then I ask you to put yourself in a position where you have a lot of Harvard professors and Code Pink people on their knees with their hands bound and a person going down the line behind them with a pistol saying, would you rather convert to Islam or would you rather get shot in the head? Every one of them is going to convert to Islam. Every one of them is going to convert to Islam. The only people who would rather get shot in the head than convert to Islam or convert to communism or convert to Nazism or convert to whoever else is controlling you with a gun to your head. The only people that would rather die than that are people who believe as strongly as they do. And that would be Christians or conceivably some Jews. Certainly there's some Jews out there. People who have strong religious beliefs because they believe there are some things more important than that. There are people who think that freedom is more important than that. There are people who think that that the idea of America is more important than that. There are people who feel that that their entire existence is owed to young men, mostly men, some women, who never came home, and that our debt to them is immeasurable and irreplaceable, and we're 40 years old, so we got to be 40 instead of dying at 20 because some guy who was 20 didn't come home, so y'all can kiss my ass, pull the trigger, I'll be goddamned if I'm going to become one of you animals. Those are the kind of people who fight back because they have a belief in something, which is why ultimately we're going to beat these progressives, because we will fight and die for these ideas and they won't. And I've said this before too. Does anybody actually believe? I know people will die for freedom because they're dying every day. As I mentioned in this latest Afterburner, they're not only getting killed overseas in uniform, they're coming home and killing themselves because of what we asked them to do for us. Didn't make them do it. We asked them to do it. They volunteered. So I know people will die for freedom because we send our best people out there to die for freedom every day. And not just our freedom either, other people's freedom. Michael Moore going to die for freedom? Is Michael Moore going to die for progressivism? Is Bill Maher, do you think, ever going to take a rifle and go find himself in a foxhole someplace fighting for progressivism and the right to smoke pot? You see Bill Maher? Do you honestly see a world where Bill Maher has a rifle and is shooting at Al-Qaeda or jihadis or Nazis or anybody for the right to smoke dope and have as many hookers as you want? I don't. I don't see that world happening ever. That's why we're going to win. And that's why we're in the fight. That's why they do everything right, we do everything wrong. It's still 50-50 country. Light has power that darkness doesn't. These people don't believe in this. Michael Moore wouldn't die for anything other than the preservation of Michael Moore. Bill Maher would not die for anything other than the preservation of Bill Maher. I think Jon Stewart falls in that category. Not all of them, but most of them. Who's going to die for the right to snort, cocaine off of a hooker's abs? Hey, listen, snorting cocaine off of a hot girl's abs is, there are worse things that you can do that's better than a sharp stick in the eye. But I'm not sure it's worth dying for. And your family is, your kids are, your wife is, your freedom is, because you know what freedom has given you, and if you don't have it, you can imagine what it's like. One of the things I do when I raise money for wounded warriors is I make a very simple, very straightforward argument. When I'm raising money for wounded soldiers, I talk to large rooms of people with lots and lots and lots of money, and they're making a decision based on how much money they want to donate to this particular cause. And I know that most rich people, contrary to what Occupy Wall Street would have you believe, most rich people go to these kind of things at least once a week, more often than not 2-3 times a week. They're giving money all the time to everybody. They're just constantly giving money to people. So the question is, who are they going to give it to and how much are they going to give? And I don't want other people to get the money that should go to wounded warriors. I think I want every penny that those people have. So when I talk to fundraisers, when I talk to rich people, I'll tell you what I say. I say to these wealthy people, I say, look at these men who are here in front of you. These guys don't have arms or legs. This gentleman over here, one of the guys I've met, doesn't have any arms or legs. He's a quadruple amputee. He doesn't have the future that he would have had. His family and his wife don't have the future that they would have had. Not only did he leave his arms and legs overseas, he left that future overseas too. He did all of those things not just so that you could make money and be free, although that was part of it, the fact that you could run a business and make money. He went over there and gave up that for that. And many guys didn't come home so that you could make money. There's nothing wrong with making money. That's an honorable thing to do, as long as you're honest about it. But really, what he did was he left all of those things behind because he didn't want you to spend your day thinking about whether or not your daughter is going to get mortared on the way home from school today. He did those things because he didn't want you to wonder whether your wife is going to go through a sniper alley, a little gap between the buildings, between the Whole Foods, let's say, and the Starbucks, where she could have her head blown off by a guy with a rifle. That's why they went. They fought and died for their buddies, but the reason they signed up was because they wanted to preserve Disneyland for everybody. So, my question to you out there is very, very simple. The question is not what would you pay to protect these things. The question is much simpler than that. The question is, if you lost these things, if these men hadn't made these sacrifices, if they hadn't done their job, and your daughter was under mortar fire every day, and you did lose children or your wife to snipers, or you are a slave of people who make you bow down and take all of your money and all of your riches and all of your house and make you live in a tent and do what they make you do. If they didn't make those sacrifices and you lost all of these things, what would you pay to get them back? What would you give to get them back? If your daughter was killed in a mortar attack getting out of her school, what would you pay to go back to where we are today? You'd pay everything. You'd pay everything you had. You'd give everything you had. Keep that in mind when we're done with the evening tonight, because these people have paid in advance. This is not a contract that we're about to enter into. This is a contract that's already been signed, and one of the parties has already made payment in full.